All right, so we are still in linkage institutions today as we move on to political parties, yet another way that various people in the political system are going to try to get their voices heard. Political parties have the goal of running people for office and trying to get them elected in elections. Um, and there are a couple different types of or segments of the political party that we need to be aware of. And that would be those that are in the electorate, which is we, the voters. So we try to make our voice louder by selecting candidates who are going to deliver on our political issues that we advocate, our problems, our concerns, our goals. There's the party organization who operate parties in order to help people get elected at the national, state, and local level. And then we have those in the government who are having, the party and government are the officials who have already been elected, who claim allegiance to their party, and are the policymakers in effect. And they're the ones who are voicing the goals of their party, but also are really the power holders in this whole system. They are the ones that the linkage institutions are trying to reach when we refer to the policymakers as kind of the same as the party and government as one part of the policymakers. Here in the United States, we have a two-party system, which it doesn't take a genius to look out the window and realize that we have two dominant parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. But we also have a party system, and there are reasons why we have that two-party system that we're going to learn about today. The tasks of a political party are numerous. They pick candidates through an endorsement. So in other words, when you're watching an election, or presidential election especially, and you see a name that has a little R or a little D next to it, that basically means that that political party, an R for a Republican Party, means that that candidate has their endorsement. And with national elections, we usually know what parties the candidates come from. But when you talk about local election or statewide elections and a lot of elections for the House of Representatives, sometimes that endorsement notifies voters about which political party that candidate plays for. But also, parties are going to be in the business of campaigning, and we talk about in presidential elections where various candidates are going to run their own campaigns. You also have to realize that a lot of times the party is helping them with their campaigns, giving them expertise, working with money, things like that. Parties also help the public understand what their party platform is. And this used to be a bigger thing than it is now. But both of the political parties are going to advocate issues. So in that aspect, they're very similar to interest groups a lot of the time. In other words, you got to remember what our whole policymaking system is about. Voters and citizens in general trying to fulfill their policy goals. Political parties will say, if you vote for us, then these are the list of issues that we will advocate. And if that fits you, then you should vote for us. If it doesn't fit you, you should vote for the other guys. And so they are a linkage institution, but in a very specific way, mainly surrounding elections, as opposed to interest groups, which are really more about articulating voices, articulating interest of various individuals and groups. And then the party and government is going to be the one who tries to get those policies through, the ones that their own party is promising. Well, if you're sitting in Congress or you're sitting in the White House, you have to deliver on those platform policies. So let's start with the first segment of the party, and that is the electorate. So parties are going to serve an important role, not only in voicing people's opinions as linkage institutions, but also helping shape those opinions. In other words, if you're a Democrat, you're in the electorate, you're a voter, and you typically go Democrat, the Democratic Party is going to tell you these are the issues that we're going to stand for. And if you don't fall in line, here's why you should fall in line. And this changes over time. The party platform is going to shift over the years and change, and you kind of have to pull your voters with you to make sure you keep getting votes. And so all this is packaged under the term party identification. Parties want to get as many people in the electorate voting for them as they can and make it official. So when you register to vote, you can register to be a Democrat. You can register to be a Republican. Um, the trend these days is for a lot more people to become independents. And in recent years, this is coming up on half of the electorate now, when traditionally there were benefits to being a Republican Party member as a part of the electorate, or there was a benefit to being a Democrat. And now, in the age of open primaries and things like that, you really don't have an incentive to join a party. It really doesn't do much for you. And so and then there's also in modern times a lot of disgruntlement with the parties, the two dominant parties, and so people are ditching them for that reason as well. So Republicans and Democrats now, under a third of the electorate register with them. While at the same time, we're not anywhere near a point where candidates for office, especially major offices like the presidency, they're not ditching their R's and D's anytime soon. So the party and government is alive and well. The party and organization is alive and well. The party and electorate is dying. And so in this age of many independents, we're seeing more and more people split their tickets, which is to say, I've been unleashed from the bonds of a certain political party. So now I have the freedom to vote for such and such from one party and then such and such from another party. And this has made them what we call swing voters, because independents are a lot of times very unpredictable. They're going to change their votes from election to election. And they kind of go with the political winds as they're blowing. So if it's a good year for Republicans, then independents are going to be voting for Republicans. And if it's a good year for Democrats, then they're going to vote for Democrats. And a lot of times, they are the reason why it's good years for each of those parties. And so this is kind of, the age of the electorate, party electorate is over, and the age of the independent is here. And so now you see candidates staying close to the middle, and trying to grab onto as many independents as possible. And this is kind of encapsulated in the so-called Downs model. In the Downs model, in a two-party system that we have, you're going to see parties stay close to the middle. And there are lots of reasons for that. One, I just mentioned, that you want to try to grab as many independents as you can. But number two, we're in a system where you got to win to get a seat. In elections for the House of Representatives, there is no seats for second place or third place or fourth place. In some countries there are. In our system, you got to win to get that seat. And so therefore, you're not going to be a fringe party. You're going to play pretty close to the middle to have a chance to win. Now, political parties depend on coalitions within the electorate, and these can be both in terms of time and size. And so, for a very long time, the Democratic Party had a coalition called the New Deal Coalition, which goes back to FDR and the New Deal during the Great Depression. And on the back of the popularity of the New Deal, FDR was able to develop a package of really reliable Democratic voters that went well beyond the New Deal itself, all the way until the 1960s. We had this New Deal coalition, and so you have these big ones, big coalitions like this. Then you have the smaller coalitions that are more about issues. And so, for example, the Democratic Party also has the Black Coalition, which functions as almost like an interest group within the Democratic Party that's going to voice concerns to black voters within the Democratic Party and make sure that they hold the party accountable to those concerns. Same thing with the evangelical vote in the GOP. The evangelicals long have been a reliable vote base in terms of a coalition for the Republican Party. Now, inevitably, as time goes by, we see a realignment of these coalitions. Um, the most famous example is in the 1960s when Southern whites, who had been a reliable coalition for the Democratic Party for hundreds of years, began to vote for Republicans during the Civil Rights Movement. And so what had been a reliable coalition for one party realigned and became a reliable coalition for the other party. Now, we can also talk about party realignment in terms of when we have political tidal waves, or when the political winds tend to change. And so we have Republican eras and we have Democratic eras, and especially these days, the independents are the ones who are kind of shifting these winds. And so they've kind of taken over this idea of realignment. I don't know that in the near future we're going to see a big crop of Republican voters switch to the Democrats or vice versa. What we're going to see more these days are the independents shifting back and forth instead. Now, we switch over to the party organization, and what we need to realize is that there are multiple tiers of the party. We have the national party organization, we have the state party organizations, and then we've got the local party organizations, all the way down to the city or county level. Um, Parties used to be dominated by local politics, and if you recall, especially in the Gilded Age in the early 1900s, we had the so-called political machines that really would be almost like mob bosses that would run local neighborhoods and communities and back a certain political party at the grassroots level. And over time, that's kind of been shifted into state and national party structures. But when we talk about the state party organization today, say the Illinois Republican Party or the Florida Democratic Party, we're basically talking about parties generating support obviously for statewide elections and also county and city elections. But also they're responsible for running their primaries. And so when we have national elections, we tend to have primaries early on that are going to seek to shift us down from multiple candidates down to one final nominee for a particular office that's going to be backed by the party. Now, the national party organizations are heavyweights in American politics. So now we're talking about the RNC, which is the Republican National Committee, or the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. They basically run their party at the national level, and they're responsible for setting up the party convention every 4 years, where they establish the platform, and then they nominate their candidates for the presidency and for the VP. But they're also in charge of the day-to-day affairs of the National Committee, which is headed up by the national chairman. And so Debbie Wasserman Schultz, or Reince Priebus is the Republican chairman. And a lot of people don't even know who they are. And these tend to change without a whole lot of fanfare for those who are the casual onlookers of politics. But they're more or less are business people, organizers that run the party. They don't necessarily run for office themselves. But the National Committee is going to be made up of some heavyweights throughout the parties, all the way from the national level down to the local level. And that could include governors and members of Congress and others. And we can rewind in American history and go back and look at the different eras of who the parties were at various stages in the government. And we can see we've always had a two-party system because of our election system. But we can talk about the early days with the Federalists, then Democratic Republicans, and then the Democrats and Whigs from Jackson and Harrison and Taylor and Polk. And then all the way up from the Civil War on, we have the Democrats and Republicans. They have changed over time, especially the Democratic Party, but they've definitely dominated the system for a long time. Now, remember, the parties are play for teams just like everybody else does. And so the Democrats are obviously for the liberal team, and they can go from very extreme liberal positions, even bordering on communism and socialism, all the way to moderately conservative. Whereas Republicans can go everywhere from very conservative to moderately conservative as well. Remember, these are linkage institutions. They are in the business of addressing people's concerns, problems, and issues, and they are a way to make a voice louder and to achieve connection to the policymakers. They themselves are the policymakers in terms of the government. Now, the division of power is something to note as well. Traditionally, American voters in the electorate have tended to like Republicans more than Democrats when it comes to choosing executives. And this is true both of the presidency and of governorships. They deal more with foreign policy. They deal more with having to be in a position of strength and confidence. And so that message has resonated more through the Republican Party. Whereas with domestic affairs, that is handled more by legislatures, both in the U.S. Congress and in the state governments, we have seen more of a preference among the electorate to choose Democrats. And of course, there's always exceptions. We've had Republican and Democrat Congresses. We've had Republican and Democrat presidents. And so, but there's a subtle pattern in the historical trends. What we can definitely say is that for lots of reasons that scholars are constantly working on and analyzing, we are in the era of divided government. The two-party system, you kind of have to fall in line with one of the two parties, and that by nature makes it divided. But what we also are seeing is that we're becoming more concrete on the sides. Even in this age of the ticket splitting and the growth of independence, parties are uncompromising. We see more and more Republicans and Democrats not being able to work together. And there are lots of things that we could point to for that reason, but you can definitely say since World War II we are in the era of divided government where unfortunately a lot of things don't get done. Congress is slow moving as it is, and then if you have a president from the other party, well then it becomes especially difficult to get policy passed. And so this is where we begin to get the discussions of how parties don't necessarily work for the people. The electorate puts them there, and then they get ignored as far as what they're supposed to do in this policy-making system. And instead, they're kind of self-protecting and making sure that they're staying in office and things like that. Now, third parties are going to come up, and we have a couple different types and a couple different functions. Single issue parties are most common, and so we see libertarian parties and green parties and things like that really are about focusing on one specific issue, and a lot of times it's an extreme position. Sometimes in American history we've had splinters off of a major party. And a lot of people are speculating that this could happen in the near future again. You may recall the Progressive Party, the Bull Moose Party that broke off the Republicans with Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. And we also had independents run for president, like Ross Perot, for example, in 1992. And in those aspects, they kind of function like third parties, even though they're technically not parties. So we've spent a lot of time talking about how it's a two-party system and you can't win unless you're with one of those two parties. So why do third parties exist? I mean, are they completely delusional that they think they can win? No, they don't think they can win. What they're trying to do is function like interest groups. They're trying to expose their particular issues, and they will use elections, which are big media events, and we talked about how the media sets the agenda. They try to use that airtime on camera, on radio, or somewhere in the media to try to expose their issues. So, for example, you get a presidential election, and Ralph Nader for the longest time ran for president promoting his environmental issues in the Green Party. He would use the national stage of a presidential campaign to get up there and say, I'm running for president, but all he really wanted to do was talk about the environment and force the two major parties to address the environment as well. So again, they're not delusional. They don't think they can win. We haven't had a third party be competitive in quite some time. It's not to say it can't happen again, but more or less they're functioning like interest groups to promote their issue. So the big question is the party over? Parties used to do a lot of things that they don't necessarily are known for now. For example, today we have this gigantic media with so much information and so much availability that the public doesn't really need the party to articulate their issues anymore. And so, every 4 years we have this national convention right before a presidential election where they spend a whole day defining their platforms. You don't even hear about it. It doesn't even make news barely that day. And so, the people, especially with independents, we're getting a more and more of an eclectic set of positions for the electorate. Now, remember, the party is standing firm in their ideology, but the electorate is starting to kind of shift around in their positions. And so they're not really following the platforms anymore. And so, for example, you might be a Republican, but you may be pro-choice. Or you might be a Democrat, and the Democratic Party tells you that you should be for gun control, but you may not be for gun control. You may be for Second Amendment rights. Interest groups have also taken a lot of the party organization's former tasks. And we talked about how they function as interest groups a lot of time to promote certain issues or help articulate issues amongst the public. Well, interest groups do that now. And we talked earlier about how groups have perpetuated so much that they have really taken over that part of the policymaking system. And as we've said, parties in government are here to stay, and for the reasons that we've listed, more or less to differentiate from each other, provide an alternative to voters, and also to protect themselves in government and keep their job. They're basically fundraising engines, they're affiliation engines, and so they're here to stay. But the electorate is dying. Because of the growth of independence and the shifting of ideology that doesn't necessarily match the parties anymore. Organizations will still be alive and well, but probably operate in a diminished function in the future. Meaning we'll still need the organizations to support those that are in government and run new people for office. But they don't do a whole heck of a lot for the electorate, which, well, honestly, the voters in a democracy are pretty important. And so, yes, the parties are not going anywhere, but they're more so about fulfilling themselves than helping the electorate articulate their interests like they used to.